Okay, let's unpack this. The Pentagon. It feels like there's a lot going on there lately. Maybe less strategy, more, well, drama.
Definitely seems that way. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is really under the microscope.
Exactly. And if you're trying to get up to speed quickly on all this unfolding stuff, that's what we're diving into today.
Yeah, it's not just one thing, is it?
No.
Like a perfect storm. You've got these controversies swirling around how he communicates. Then there's this big shakeup with his staff. And underneath it all, these really fundamental arguments about foreign policy directions all happening at once.
Right. So for this deep dive, we've looked at a whole range of material. We've got The American Conservative, Media Matters, Politico, The Washington Examiner, Breitbart.
And that YouTube interview with Dan Caldwell, Hegseth's former advisor on Tucker Carlson, plus the Reddit chatter.
Yeah, we even dipped into Reddit. So our mission here for you is to sort of cut through all that noise. We want to pull out the key players, the main fights, and, what it might all mean without getting bogged down.
Makes sense. And maybe a good starting point is that idea from the American conservative personnel is policy.
Right.
It's interesting because, well, in Trump's first term, it often felt like that idea was kind of ignored. Policy stayed pretty similar despite the rhetoric.
Yeah, continuity despite the talk of change.
But now, second term, it seems like staff can getting more attention. Still, you see these big internal disagreements, especially on foreign policy.
Right.
It suggests they're not just struggling to staff for a policy, but maybe even to agree on what the policy is inside the building.
That's a really sharp point. And it makes that Wall Street Journal editorial advice to Hegseth, hire loyal grown-ups, not self-promoting isolationists.
Yeah.
It makes that land differently, doesn't it?
It really does. It highlights this tension, the different factions, even on the right, pulling in different directions about what Hegseth should be doing, what defense policy should look like.
Exactly. Which brings us straight to those recent firings, right? His top aides, and the fact that at least one of them was apparently pushing for, let's say, a more restrained foreign policy. Well, it suggests these aren't just random shuffles.
No, probably not administrative tweaks. It could be a deliberate move, trying to get everyone in his close circle on the same page, ideologically speaking, and, how much that actually changes policy debates inside the Pentagon. That's the big question, isn't it?
Okay, so let's pivot to the whole Signalgate thing. That's gotten a lot of attention.
Right, Signalgate. It's all about Hegseth allegedly using Signal, the encrypted messaging app.
And why is that such a big deal for people wondering, I mean?
Well, it hits on a couple of key things, security and transparency. First, there's the potential violation of federal record-keeping laws. Official government communications, especially military stuff, have to be documented legally.
Right, the paper trail. Or the digital trail.
Exactly. Using an encrypted app makes people ask, are those records being kept? Then there's the maybe even more serious accusation about classified information potentially being compromised.
Classified stuff? Like what?
Well, reports in The Atlantic and Breitbart mention things like details about weapon systems, even specific timings for attacks in Yemen. Really sensitive stuff.
Wow. Okay. Shared over Signal.
That's the allegation. And sharing that kind of info through, unapproved channels, that's a huge security red flag.
And wasn't there something about a dirty line? The Washington Examiner mentioned that.
Yeah, that report claimed he used an unsecured internet connection, not the secure government networks, on a personal computer in his office to access Signal.
That sounds incredibly risky in a place like the Pentagon.
It does. Now, a Pentagon spokesperson did deny to the Examiner that he used an unsecured line on his government computer. But they also confirmed that, how communication systems are used is classified information. So even using a personal device on some random Wi-Fi in that building, it raises serious questions.
But we've also seen a pretty robust defense mounted for him, right?
Oh, yeah. Caroline Leavitt on X, Ben Shapiro via Media Matters, they both come out swinging, basically echoing the White House line, calling it politically motivated, fake news, expressing full support.
A very coordinated message, it seems.
Absolutely. It shows how polarized things are. Going against someone so tight with the former president, especially publicly, is, it's politically dangerous for Republicans.
But, okay, behind the public defense, there is an official investigation happening.
Yes. Breitbart reported the Pentagon's acting inspector general is looking into it. This came at the request of the Senate Armed Services Committee leadership.
And Senator Reid, the Democrat, specifically wants them to look at a second Signal chat, too.
That's right. This second chat, reported by the New York Times via Breitbart, is interesting. Apparently, it included Hegseth's wife, who used to be a Fox News producer, and his brother, who was a DHS liaison at the Pentagon.
His family. And what about the content?
Reportedly, it contained the same sensitive info about warplane launch times as the first chat allegedly did.
Okay, that adds another layer. Raises more questions about who had access and, again, the security protocols.
Definitely. Though it's worth noting, Breitbart also pushes the White House view here, framing it less as a security lapse and more as an institutional fight, like the establishment pushing back against Hegseth trying to change things.
So the narrative becomes disruptor versus the bureaucracy.
Pretty much. It tries to shift focus away from the security worries and paint Hegseth as this change agent hitting resistance. It's a common political playbook.
And Hegseth himself, how's he responding?
Forcefully. Breitbart quoted him dismissing it all as just anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees. He says he's focused on changing the Defense Department, putting the Pentagon back in the hands of warfighters.
So doubling down on the reformer image?
Exactly. It's a message that plays well with his base, suggesting any criticism is just from people who don't like the changes he's making.
Okay, let's talk more about those changes, specifically the personnel side, the high-level staff purge, as Politico and Breitbart called it.
Right. The firings of Dan Caldwell, Darren Selnick, Colin Carroll, all at the same time. And these weren't strangers. They knew Hegseth from Concerned Veterans for America.
Suggested a real clean sweep of his inner circle.
The report said they were all escorted out together. That signals a very deliberate, very decisive move to reshape his advisory team swiftly.
And it seems tied, potentially, to these big foreign policy disagreements, especially on Iran.
Sources suggest that, Caldwell in particular was apparently a strong voice against military action. He favored diplomacy, but, backed by a credible military option, not rushing into conflict.
And we heard Caldwell himself talk about the risks of war with Iran in that Tucker Carlson interview, didn't we?
We did. He laid out the potential costs, human lives, massive financial drain, more instability in the region, making Americans there vulnerable, huge potential consequences.
He also flat out denied leaking anything classified. And that interview even floated the idea he was framed because he opposed war with Iran.
Which is a really serious accusation. It just highlights how intense these internal battles must be, how high the stakes are felt to be.
Yeah. And Politico mentioning a scathing opinion piece from a former senior staffer kind of backs up that idea of serious internal friction.
It definitely points to significant disagreement and maybe some bad blood after those departures.
Now, thinking about the politics of this, we see some Republicans publicly defending Hegseth, but Politico suggests there's nervousness behind the scenes.
That seems to be the case. Privately, some Republicans are apparently worried that all this controversy is becoming a distraction, a political headache they don't need.
It sounds like a bit of a tightrope walk for them.
It probably is. You want to back a Trump appointee in a key role, but you also see the potential political damage if these stories keep coming.
So far, Politico says only one Republican, Don Bacon from Nebraska, has actually called for Hegseth to resign.
Right. And it's maybe relevant that Bacon's district went for Biden in 2024. That might give him a bit more leeway to break ranks compared to others.
Because for most House Republicans,
well, as Politico points out, most represent districts where Trump is still very popular. So criticizing Hegseth publicly, that's a big political risk for them personally.
Still, we have seen public defenses from people like Brian Mast, Mark-Wayne Mullen, Josh Hawley, Eric Schmidt, Donald Trump Jr., too.
And Eric Schmidt's comment, mentioned in Politico, about the D.C. foreign policy establishment trying to push Hegseth out. That's a recurring theme.
Yeah, that narrative again, the outsider battling the insiders.
It definitely resonates with a part of the base. And as Aaron Covey from Quick Political Report told Politico, going against someone perceived as loyal to Trump is just risky business for Republicans right now. That probably explains why the public criticism is so muted, despite the private worries.
Okay, let's zoom out just a bit. The sources all seem to point to these broader foreign policy clashes within the administration. Iran and Ukraine keep coming up.
Absolutely. That pressure for military action against Iran seems like a really significant fault line.
And the arguments against it, like Caldwell laid out.
They're pretty stark. Massive loss of life, huge financial burden, destabilizing the whole region even more, putting Americans there at greater risk, potential terrorism blowback, maybe even a catastrophic oil price spike. It's a long list of potential downsides.
Caldwell also made that interesting strategic point, didn't he, about current U.S. policy maybe pushing countries like Iran, Russia, China, who aren't exactly natural allies closer together against the U.S.
Yeah, that was thought-provoking. His argument seemed to be that U.S. policy needs a rethink, focusing squarely on American safety and prosperity first, and questioning if the current approach is actually achieving that, or maybe even undermining it.
Just wrapping up some other details we came across, Hegseth's confirmation itself was really close, right? Needed the VP's tiebreaker vote.
It did, yeah. The
Uh,
American Conservative highlighted that. It shows he didn't exactly have overwhelming bipartisan support from the start.
And there was that slightly odd report in the Washington Examiner about a makeup studio near the press room, which Hegseth denied.
Right, that one was a bit strange. Seemed like maybe a distraction tactic by opponents, hard to say. But the broader issue Politico touched on federal workers, using encrypted apps like Signal or Confide, that seems like a real ongoing concern about transparency and record-keeping across government, not just a DoD.
Lamar Smith's letter about EPA using Signal shows it's cropped up elsewhere.
Exactly. And Politico also hinted at worries about changes to civil service protections, which could add to a feeling of instability for career federal employees.
One last personnel point. That mention of Chairman Dan Raisin-Cain's appointment potentially upsetting career paths and maybe contributing to leaks.
Yeah, the suggestion was that appointing someone seen as outside the normal promotion track might have ruffled feathers among career military folks, potentially making them more inclined to share information outside official channels. It speaks to the internal dynamics.
Okay, so pulling this all together, it's clear the Pentagon under Hegseth is going through a really turbulent time. You've got the communication controversies, the big staff changes, pointing to internal fights over ideology, and these deep divides on major foreign policy issues like Iran.
And while he clearly has the backing of the former president and key allies, you can sense the unease bubbling up within the GOP and certainly among national security watchers.
It really throws into sharp relief how complicated it is to manage national security policy, especially with so much internal disagreement, public scrutiny, and, well, just the complexity of the world right now.
I can agree more.
So for you listening, hoping for a clearer picture of this pretty complex situation, we hope this deep dive helped to lay out the key pieces and the different angles.
And it leaves us with something to think about, maybe. With these deep divisions inside the administration and the stakes being so incredibly high on foreign policy, how could these internal conflicts actually shape where U.S. national security goes in the next few months?
And that whole personnel as policy idea. What does it really mean when the personnel seem to be disagreeing so fundamentally on the actual policies? Makes you wonder.